So it's Rachel Bernstein. I'm here with Bill Holayter. It's Friday, November 22nd, 2013. We're in Las Vegas at the end of the Retirees Convention. So,
almost Kennedy's assassination today.
Yeah, was
the
it?
time.
The time
was, I think 11, wasn't it? 11 in Dallas.
That sounds right. Yeah, it's this morning. I know it's this morning.
Yeah.
So.
Which would be 10. I think 10 here. As a matter of fact, I remember I was the assistant steward in the plant I was in. So I was on the night shift. So I was having breakfast in the morning when the announcement was made.
Did you have the radio on?
Radio, yeah.
I was on the playground. And
on the playground.
So weird the way the news spread across.
Okay.
So, if you don't mind, I want to start with where you were born and when, and just a little bit about where you came from.
Born in East Chicago, Indiana. As a matter of fact, let me ask you a question. My wife had commissioned a small biography that tells a lot about, I'll answer your questions, but I wonder if you'd like to. Now that's the first printing where I corrected a lot of the stuff. So, but
are the corrections in here?
Yeah, name pages and stuff like that. But
I'm so sorry I didn't read it before the interview, but
well,
it's
only a
thing.
few copies were made.
Okay.
It was for family and people like George Corpus.
Got it.
And do you know Vic Fingerhut?
Uh-huh.
Vic he's a very close friend of mine. But anyway, it's people who quoted stuff. Anyway.
Okay.
East Chicago, Indiana.
So this is a book, and we're gonna skip over some other things in it, I guess. But good to know. It's a beautiful hardback book. I will look at it and pass it on to the archives.
That's a throwaway copy, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, because it was a correcting copy.
So before we go, I'll get you to sign it.
Oh, okay.
And we're going to put it in the IAM archives.
Okay.
I'm not going to keep it for myself.
And that's my mom and dad on the back.
Oh, wow. Okay.
50th wedding anniversary. Or 60th, I forget. Anyway.
That's
East Chicago,
wonderful.
Indiana.
Chicago?
East Chicago.
East Chicago.
Which, if you want me to comment, which at that time was probably one of the best union towns along with Butte, Montana in the whole United States. In East Chicago, if you were not a registered Democrat and a member of a union, you couldn't get a job in East Chicago itself.
And you were born in?
1931.
1931.
Yeah.
And were your parents union?
Oh, my father was a socialist from Hungary, who will tell you in the book there, he walked, his father deserted him when he was 11 years old in a little village called Ziasta was in Transylvania then, but it's still a little piece of Transylvania that remained in Hungary up by the Ukraine border. And at 11 years old, he walked from his village, where he was deserted, to Budapest and he became an apprentice carpenter. And then at 15, he had enough money, and all he had was his journeyman carpenter papers. He walked across, which was Czechoslovakia, then Slovakia, Germany to Bremerhaven, got a ship, Ellis Island, that story, in 1908. Wound up going found his father. So he stopped to see his father in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, told him how much he disliked him for doing what he did. And then we wound up in East Chicago because that's where his older brother was.
So you had family there?
Yeah. Family in East Chicago is almost all gone. Death, and I still have a cousin there
So how long did you live there? You grew up there? When
16.
So you went to through high school?
No, started there, started Catholic high school, but then my folks moved to California in 1946, which was the best move they ever made.
Yeah. What drew them there?
Pardon me?
What did they go for? What took them to California?
To get the hell out of East Chicago, Indiana. That East Chicago was, at that time, and until the Clean Air Act, was the dirtiest city in the United States.
Did they leave because of the air?
Air, yeah.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, steel mills, oil refineries, and chemical plants. Good place to work, but you
Bad place to
didn't
breathe.
live. Yeah, well, I've had 5 bouts of cancer.
Really?
Yeah, different places. Doctor says it's from the smoking and air I breathed when I was a kid. Yeah. But it was, like I say, a good place to work. The steel mills.
So did he work in steel? In the steel industry?
My father was a carpenter and millwright.
Oh, right. He got his carpenter papers when he was very young, and he kept to it.
Anyhow, we moved to California.
Okay.
Southern California, first of all, because my father and mother had friends there, and they just wanted to get out of East Chicago because of the environment there. And then my father was offered a job with, what the hell's the name of that company that makes them, the sheeting that goes up, you hang the hanging floors, hanging ceilings.
Yeah. I know.
Yeah, he was offered a job as a foreman there. He was, at the time, he was working for Kaiser. He was a foreman on the job that in a place called Iron Mountain down in past Palm Springs.
Okay.
There's a big.
It's funny. I know an Iron Mountain in Michigan.
It's a hill called Iron Mountain.
Oh, actually, I do know. Okay. Yeah.
He was a foreman on that job, a millwright, and then offered the job up in San Jose, and that's where we moved to San Jose in '48. And my father died at 94. My mom stayed in that house until she was 97, sold it, moved here as a matter of fact, because I have 2 sisters here.
Huh.
And she lived another 7 years. She died at 104.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway.
So you finished high school in California?
San Jose.
In San Jose.
San Jose High, as a matter of fact.
And what do you have any recollection of what you wanted in your life at that?
Well, I started out to be an apprentice carpenter, and my father talked me out of it. And of course, then the Korean War came along, and I didn't want to get drafted in the Army, so I joined the Navy. I joined the Navy in January. Well, I went in January 8th of 1951 and out in October of '54. Immediately went to work as a journeyman machinist. And
so wait, so when you're in the Navy, you've probably done a lot of
training,
on-the-job training.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I was in the sheet metal shop, and because I was sheet metal, 3rd-class sheet metalman, but I also flew nose gunner in a P-2V squadron. At the end, before that, I was at Alameda, a Master at Arms, and then I went to this P-2V squadron, which anti-submarine squadron is what it is.
Okay.
Flew missions over Korea. The squadron was called the Candlelight Squadron because we would fly out of Okinawa and drop incendiary bombs on the targets. Then the B-29s would come in and drop the bombs where they saw the light.
Oh, no kidding. Okay. Huh. So you were lighting the way.
Yeah. We lit the targets is what we did because we could fly low and slow. Yeah. Lost three out of our 12 plane squadron. But anyway, then we went up to Alaska, Kodiak, for almost a year.
Still in the Navy.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Still in a P-2V squadron. We're looking for Russian submarines.
Right.
Found a lot of them under the polar cap. So what we were looking for them under under the ice, and they were there. So was ours. They luckily didn't run into each other too much.
Right.
But anyway, but I've had a union background through my father, who was strong union. I mean, you couldn't find a stronger union person than him.
So you were taught not to cross a picket line from a
Oh,
very
absolutely.
early
Are you
age.
kidding? That was mortal sin. And we would talk. It's when my mom and dad wanted the kids, my two oldest sister and myself, to tell them what we did during the day, how was school, what happened. You know, at dinner, dinner was a social event as well as an eating event, and always embedded in that is the fact that what we have now is because of the union. The fact that we're able to have food on the table and clothes and all that was always embedded in us.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
It's a strong lesson.
yeah, we've lost some of that, I think.
We've lost a lot of that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
But, so,
Yeah, my dad used to say, matter of fact, we used to go over to the house Sunday afternoon. Dinner was a deal even when my grandmother and grandfather were alive in East Chicago, and then they finally moved to California too. But I went over there one morning, and I'm complaining to my father. I lived in San Jose. I was working in San Jose. I said, "God damn, the taxes are just killing us. I can't afford these taxes anymore." And my father says, "Listen, Billy," he called me Billy. I remember the day I never paid any taxes. I didn't have anything either. I pay taxes now, and I have something. Anyway.
that's a very decent way
He
to
was
look at it.
he was a good lesson person. Good teacher.
So you get out of the Navy and...
Yeah, I got out of the Navy in October of '54. Went to work for a company called Hiller Helicopters in East Palo Alto. Stanley Hiller, who originated on Long Island but moved to California, developed a helicopter that he developed what's called the ramjet engine, which went on the ends of the rotors to give it more power.
Okay.
And I worked there for almost 3 years.
What kind of work?
I was a certified aircraft welder. That's one of them jobs where you had to stamp every weld you made, because if something went wrong,
They needed to trace it.
you were responsible for it. Of course, we tested every weld we did too. And we were working with exotic metals at that time, Inconel and Inconel X and that kind of stuff that had never been heard of before.
I don't know what those are,
Yeah.
actually.
Exotic metals.
Okay.
That's what we used for the blades and the little ramjets. Yeah. I became a shop steward there after a year.
Do you remember when you first heard about the union on your job?
Oh, I joined the union right away. Of course, like a good union place, the shop steward came around and said, "This is a union shop." I said, "I know it's a union shop. That's why I'm working here." And I joined the union right away, naturally, and became active in the union right away.
Started going to meetings and...
Oh, yeah. In them days, we didn't have, as a matter of fact, it was negotiated in a contract later, but in them days, we didn't have the checkoff for union dues.
Uh-huh.
So to pay your union dues, you went down to Union Hall.
With your book.
With your book and your $5.
Your money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
$5 dues.
Do you still have your first book?
It is probably someplace, but in all the moves I've made and everything, I could probably find it, because that is something I would have saved.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know where it is.
So you got active. Were there political issues in that?
Oh, always. I mean, I became immediately, involved in politics. My mom and dad were involved in politics. If you read that read that book, you'll see there's one of the funniest stories. I regress. Is in 1972, my father hated Nixon. I mean, absolutely hated him. Thought he was the worst person in the world. And a lot of it was because he really liked Helen Cahagan Douglas. Remember her? Remember
I do,
that?
and I remember, yes.
And for Nixon to name her a communist, which was in that election, what the heck year was that? 50, 48, I forget. But anyway.
I'm not sure. Yeah, right in there.
When Nixon beat her. But anyway, in 1972, when Nixon was running for re-election, and incidentally, we'll get along into that, after the Executive Council meeting in Florida, when we knew that the AFL-CIO was not going to endorse McGovern, Red Smith, who was president at the time, instructed me to try to form a labor for McGovern committee, which I did, incidentally. But my mother was the precinct captain, Democratic precinct captain, but also had the voting at our house.
Oh, no kidding.
We would clear the furniture out of the living room and set up the booths in the living room in San Jose and conduct the voting. She was not only the precinct captain for the Democratic Party, she was also the election precinct person.
Right.
My father stood out, and we had a driveway and then a walkway that went up to the front door. My father would stand in the sidewalk, and he'd ask people. He started at 6 o'clock in the morning. Ask people, "How are you going to vote?" And if they told him, "You could, I'm not going to tell you," or they said they're going to vote for Nixon, so you can't come into my house. This is a true story. My mother had to finally call the police.
On your father?
On my father.
Because he wouldn't stop doing that, because he
would
hated
not
Nixon
stop.
so much.
She'd come out and ask him, other people working, "This is in my house," she said. "If they're going to vote for Nixon, I'm not going to let them into my house." That's how strong my father was on that kind of stuff. Anyway.
So at this second you got into the union, you were involved in political
Absolutely.
issues.
Yeah. And then you'll see later on very strong in San Jose when I became a business agent in the 60s. I was given the job of being the political person for our district. So where are we?
You've just joined the union and you're almost a shop steward, and I asked you if there was anything political, and you said, of course, how could there not be? But do you recall some particular
Well, just in general, but the big one was
effort that you were involved in, and were there
I didn't.
disagreements within the...
Pardon me?
And were there disagreements in the local?
Not until I came back. I left in 1957. I thought California, where I lived, was getting too crowded with people in 1957. So I moved to Idaho and started working with the Sheet Metal Workers Union. And it was good work until late 1959. I worked out at the Atomic Energy Center some, at ARCO. And I also worked, that's when they were setting up the potato plants.
Oh,
that
okay.
made the dehydrated potato
Right.
plants. And we had a lot of good work, a lot of conveyor work, duct work, and that kind of stuff. And I moved to Idaho because my first wife's people were in the Salt Lake City area. My first wife's Mormon, and she had 3 uncles that lived on the Lost River in Idaho. Great fishing.
Yeah.
So I said, hell, I'm going to go hunting and fishing for a while, which I did. But also worked in politics then.
So you worked as a sheet metal worker and worked for the union, or you were a full-time?
No, I just worked at that time, the 3 years from 1957, 58, and 59 into 60. I came back to California in June of 1960. I was offered a job by Westinghouse to come and work there, and that's when it really became active. Shop steward, I came back, went to work in July. They asked me to be the steward in January when the elections were held. I became a steward. This would be January 61. In 63, I became the assistant chief steward. That necessitated me going on to the swing shift. The setup we had with Westinghouse, which was really a pretty damn good setup, Westinghouse paid the chief steward to do nothing except solve problems.
Yeah.
But I was the assistant, which meant I had to go on to the swing shift, which when you elected assistant steward, Westinghouse would let you transfer onto the swing shift. So I went on the swing shift, but I had to work the job unless there was some problem. So my duties were the swing shift and the graveyard shift. So after the swing shift was over with, I'd stick around with the graveyard people, talk to the graveyard people, then go home, actually go to the bar and have a couple drinks and go home and go to bed, get up the next day. Then in 65, I believe 65, 66, too far back, I was elected chief steward. So I go back on day shift. And that's a full-time job at that time.
Union,
Yeah.
It's not a union staff, but it's paid by Westinghouse.
Paid by Westinghouse, but we had our own office on the premises, and
that is a good arrangement, huh?
yeah. It was designed after some of the UAW contracts, actually. Yeah. And as far as I know, it might have been the only Westinghouse place where they had that, where Westinghouse paid the steward full-time, paid the steward not to work. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
To solve, I mean, there are always problems.
Actually,
so.
in talking to the, was a personnel director at that time, which what they call now human
HR, human resources.
Yeah, resources. Personnel director. And I got to know each other pretty well because actually we'd solve a lot of problems before it ever got to his level. And that was one of their philosophies. If we can get these problems solved on the shop floor, it was worth paying this guy to do it, you know.
So tell me some of the problems you solved.
Oh, geez. You know, the age-old stuff, you know, foremen picking on people, you know, theft problems, you know, people getting fired over you know, not paying attention to orders, you know, that kind of stuff. Absenteeism.
Did you help people with substance issues?
We didn't have that problem in them days. We had some alcohol problems, but we didn't have drug problems. Some people smoke marijuana, but never had any of the hard stuff.
Mm.
You know, that was in the 60s, and it wasn't so prevalent at that time.
And were there any women in your?
Oh yeah, we had a few women, and matter of fact, that was one of the problems we'd run into every once in a while. Some guy would, you know, use bad language around the women, and they'd complain to the foreman. The foreman would get on about using the bad language. Yeah, what the hell are you working in the shop, you know? Yeah, but you were like. You were almost like a priest. It was a fun job, really.
Yeah. Was it did it keep you really busy?
Pardon me?
Did it keep you really busy?
No, not too much. Not too much with really serious stuff. You'd get into something really serious every once in a while. I think we only had 3 arbitrations all the time I was a chief steward there.
So you
because
really
we were able to solve things before that, and There was one that as a matter of fact, I mentioned that in the book. There was one that I absolutely refused to even represent. And the guy could have probably filed with the labor board, but he stole tools from other people there on the floor, micrometers, this kind of stuff.
Right.
And he got caught. I refused to represent him because I said, if you stole from the company, I'd represent you. But you steal from your fellow worker, I ain't gonna represent you. And so he got fired and away. But we've had cases where they, guy would steal, and if he was guilty, what are you gonna do? You represent him, but you still
expect him to.
Yeah, you can't
Face the consequences.
Yeah, you commit a crime, But anyway, had a good time. Then as a matter of fact, it became very active politically within the district. It was District 93, which no longer exists in San Jose. Then in January of '67, I was appointed business agent. And at that time, because I was politically active, the part of my duties, in addition to having 50 shops, I went out of Westinghouse, but I had 50 small shops. Largest one was a Continental can shop. It had 110 employees. That was the largest shop I had, and as small as 3 employees in a shop.
50 is a lot to keep track of.
Oh, I made it a point to visit every shop at least twice a month. Go through the shop, how's things going, because they didn't, the only shop that had a shop steward was that Continental can shop. The other one didn't have a shop steward. So actually I became their shop steward as well as their business agent. And I also had the responsibility for politics at that time, 67, 68, I'm sorry, 68 and 69. And in '69, I was asked to go back to Washington, D.C. That's
So wait, don't jump ahead. Let's stick to the 60s for a few more minutes.
Okay,
when you were in San Jose, were you involved in citywide political organizations?
I was so involved that in our district I had a very good boss. Our Central Labor Council, we were very, very liberal. Our Central Labor Council, just as an example, in the Contra Costa Labor Council, which was represented by a guy by the name of Art Carter, who was a good friend and also was appointed by Governor Brown as a labor commissioner, I believe. But anyway, we were the only 2 labor councils in the United States that would pass a resolution against the Vietnam War.
And this was in?
'68. Yeah. And we would always send that resolution in National AFL-CIO.
And did the members of your local and your district be pretty close?
My boss supported me on the Vietnam War.
Really?
But our membership was against the Vietnam War. Yeah.
I always thought that there would have been more contention within.
Santa Clara County had the workers there were pretty union-minded, pretty liberal, which I think it attested to the Central Labor Council and what they did. Did a lot of good things. Had fundraisers for people in need, and all this kind of good stuff. There was a good union movement in Santa Clara County. I don't know what it's like now, but in them days it was.
It was active on many different fronts.
Active community services and all that, yeah. But anyway, in 1968, I'm a business agent. And the day that Lyndon Johnson announced, this was in March, something, that he was not going to run for re-election, my boss, Jimmy LeBlanc, said, Bill, he says, try to find a storefront office downtown. We'll open a Humphrey for headquarters office. So I took money out of the petty cash found a storefront that was vacant right on Santa Clara and 7th Street. And we rented it. It became the Humphrey for President headquarters through the whole election. Machinists paid for it. In them days, you could get away with that kind of stuff.
Right. It wasn't illegal.
And there's a guy by the name of Alan Parker, which if he's still alive, you ought to, but he's not a union guy, he's a lawyer, but if he's still alive, you ought to talk to him.
Yeah.
Alan Parker was the chair of the Democratic Party in Santa Clara County. And of course, Alan Parker, come on, Alan, here's the office for free. So that became the Humphrey for President, plus other Democrats. And I and Alan Parker, because I was paying the bill, I say our district was paying the bill,
right.
Actually became almost like the co-chairman of the Humphrey for President in Santa Clara County. Alan Parker came to Washington, D.C. a couple of years after I did, and he became Peter Odino's chief of staff on the Judiciary Committee. Alan Parker was the chief of staff when they did the Nixon impeachment.
No kidding.
Yeah, my friend Alan Parker. After Rodino lost, I forget what year it was, but then Alan Parker became the executive director of the Trial Lawyers Association. And then I lost track of Alan Parker. In 1968, and you can check this, the numbers are not exact, but in 1960, Nixon beat Kennedy in the 10,000 vote area in Santa Clara County. In 1962, Nixon beat Pat Brown by about the same amount in Santa Clara County. In 1968, we turned it around and Humphrey won Santa Clara County.
No kidding.
By about that number of votes, yeah. And
Did you all knock on doors and phone bank? And
we studied every
rally?
Precinct in the county. I mean, this was before the days where everything was computerized.
I know, yeah. So tell me a little bit about the operation.
But there was a guy by the name of Scammon. I can't remember his first name. Big, heavy-set guy. He's a guy who developed the precinct analysis program. But you analyzed every precinct and you put them into 3 categories. 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, whatever you want to call them. Strong Democratic precinct, middle precinct, strong Republican precinct. So you worked on the number 1 to try to increase the vote, try to increase
get out the vote.
Get out the vote.
Get people to the polls.
And then if you had time, you worked on these. If you had time and people, these you tried to not pay any attention to at all. I mean, you just forgot all about it.
Republican.
So
yeah.
our get out the vote effort is what really paid off in the '68 election. Plus, we had a lot of students.
Did you work together with him?
Oh, I had just quit college because I couldn't do college anymore. I was a political science, history and political science.
At San Jose?
No, it was at West Valley Junior College.
Okay.
I had quit college because of my time, but I knew the professors and everything. I'd get them to send kids over they want to work in a campaign, send them over to our place, which they
experience.
did. Yeah. So, we were able to work all of the number 1 precincts hard, door to door, And then naturally on election day, to get out the vote effort was tremendous. And we turned Santa Clara County around. Yeah.
The machinists and the students.
Yeah, a lot of students.
Yeah.
A lot of, and Democratic activists.
Yeah, other people too, but yeah.
And then as a result of that, that effort that I put into that, and I say boy, I never saw my wife hardly at all, and the kids, because I was working all the time during that election period. And that election period didn't start on Labor Day. It started the day we opened that Humphrey for headquarters office. Anyway, others in the union, I remember Hal Sheen and our general vice president at that time was, I can't think of his name. Anyhow, they wanted to hire an assistant director of our political department in D.C., and I was recommended, and I was asked if I wanted to go back. As a matter of fact, George Corpus was the one who contacted me at that time. He was one of the assistants to the president, and I met George for the first time in late October, early November at a District 141 convention where he asked me to go and speak to him. Now, I'm still a business agent in District 93. He asked me to do this to see how I'd handle myself and everything. So I went and spoke, and I told him I was being considered for this job, and Corpus was there. And after that, he says, I want you to come back to Washington, D.C. next week, which I did. And I was interviewed by Vernon Jerichowick, who's now dead, and Red Smith, who was the president at the time, and they offered me the job. And this was in November. And they said, can you be here December 1 to go on the job? And I said, sure. I was in the process of a divorce anyway, so.
I was just going to say, what about your family?
Yeah, I was in the process of divorce. My oldest daughter, who was not my blood daughter, but I raised her, she was out, she was married. The biggest disappointment was my youngest daughter, who was very near and dear to me. But she did come and live with me for a while in 1972. She's now dead. Ovarian cancer, which they didn't find in time.
They hardly ever do.
53.
My closest friend, my co-author of my book, was saying the exact thing, a few years younger.
We're talking about that. I've had 5 bouts of cancer, and I keep saying to myself, the billions and billions of dollars we've spent on cancer research, and we still don't know what the hell we're doing. We're making little gains here and there, but we have not solved the problem. We have not solved the stopping it in the first place. Yeah, and that's where it is.
Yeah.
Stopping it in the first place.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay, so he says, move to Washington in a few weeks, and that works for you.
Yeah, I did, as a matter of fact. I packed up all of my stuff in a couple of suitcases in a big box, flew back to Washington, D.C.
Can I just ask, was the nonstop work a contributing factor to the breakup of your marriage?
Yeah, plus my own stupidity. Yeah, work and fooling around. It was there, it was easy. Young guy, Yeah, my own fault.
Okay. I always wonder when people work all the time, how they manage.
In politics, it's so prevalent. Even the ones that know they shouldn't do it, like the Clintons. Yeah, there it is. There so many of these guys in Congress get caught fooling around. They don't get caught, but they're fooling around with somebody in the office. It's so prevalent that sex is a crazy thing. And
it's so closely linked to power, which is part of the political scene.
It's a I don't know, but it's like a disease almost.
It's a powerful force, that we can say for sure.
Yeah.
So you moved to Washington.
Yeah, and started right out traveling a lot and analyzing. I had a very good guy by the name of Don Ellinger, who actually was one of the most brilliant guys I ever met. Had a mind like a trap. Don came to Washington. Don was a representative for the Garment Workers Union in Missouri. Went to Texas during the Kennedy campaign. Was brought to Washington, D.C. by Bobby Kennedy, the Justice Department, and then and I can't think of his name. be able to get it in your archives. The first director of the political department of the Machinists Union. I can't think of his name.
Okay.
He was Estes Kefauver's a staff person
Oh, no kidding.
or his executive assistant, something.
Mm-hmm.
But he was hired by Roy C. Miller to be the first political director of the Machinists Union.
And who was the political director when you first came?
Don Ellinger.
Okay, got it.
This guy died at age 55 of a heart attack. Don Ellinger died at age 55 of a heart attack. When I became 55, I said, shit, man, I got to get through this year, which I did.
You were by then the political director, and we were worried.
Yeah, because Don had died in February 72, and that's when I became the political director.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
So, 68 to 72, you're the assistant political director.
December 1 of 69
Oh, 69.
to
Okay.
February of 72. Don died on February the 12th, I believe it was. Massive heart attack, walking down the stairs at his home to answer the phone. Just collapsed and died right there on the spot.
Oh.
Yeah.
So tell me about when you that first year or two when you arrived in Washington. You said you were traveling a lot.
Great fun job because I've said several times, Jesus, if I had the money, I'd pay to do this rather than them paying me. I mean, it was a fun job. I was out there with the membership, trying to motivate them to get politically involved, and also studying. After a while, I was known as, I knew every congressional district in the country, you know, the demographics of it and everything, just studying with it.
And so did that mean that wherever you went, you could tell people the details?
I knew what the deal was in their congressional district.
Because one of the things about political campaigning that I've noticed in organizations is people go out to mobilize the members, but the level of information that the members get is pretty shallow.
Yeah.
And that's a huge problem. You know, motivation is incredible, and you know, the right side is incredible, but having the knowledge is also
just to give you an example,
critical.
I started something after I became the director. You know, we had limited resources, naturally. At that time, we didn't even, didn't have the check off for contributions. Weren't raising a whole lot of money, and but I made it a point to sit down with the executive council of every one of our machinist state councils. And I really had two theories in it. One of the theories was making them feel a part of making decisions, and the other theory was, teaching them that we have limited resources. We can only put the money in where it's going to do the most good. And of course, in them days, we had about 2 to 3 times more what you call marginal congressional districts than we have now.
Right.
We had in the vicinity of 90 to 110 marginal congressional districts, and we looked at them, and we also looked at states like North Dakota, South Dakota, where small amounts of money made a big difference. But the senator from that state was just born as one from California or New York,
right.
And that's the theory that I got going. And the main thing I think that came out of that was before that, all the decisions, not all, but most of the decisions were made by the president and the resident vice president. Not to take it away from them, but the decisions started to be made by the people. I developed a program where we would never make a contribution to a candidate unless that candidate was endorsed by our state council. If it was for a congressional district or a senate race, we wouldn't do it. Before that, erase that thought. We were not as democratic as we should have been. And incidentally, it increased our fundraising.
Well, if candidates come to be interviewed by the state council, they haven't.
Well, it made our people in the field more a part of the whole process. And of course, we started raising more money and doing a lot better. At one time, we were the fourth after the campaign law legislation in, when was that, 74 or whenever it was, after Watergate. You know, they passed some laws and stuff. We became the fourth largest political action committee, money-wise, in the country.
No kidding.
Yeah, there was a time. Now I don't know where we are, because I don't pay any attention to it. But from 72 until I retired on May 1 of 92, I was the director. In between that, and I even, you'll note it in there, which I objected to, but being a good machinist, I said, oh, of course I'll do it. In 1980, George Poulin was the resident vice president. Wimpensinger was the president. George Poulin says, we're going to merge the legislative department with the political department. And I said, that's a mistake. And he says, but we want you to be the director of the merged department. And I said, well, if you're going to do it, of course I'll do it. But in 1981, then I became the director of the Legislative and Political Action Department of the Machinists Union.
So in the 70s, they're two separate, the legislative is
Two separate departments, yeah.
And legislatives are the people who lobby on the Hill?
Yep.
And political action?
I just did the politics, raising
Connected
money,
with the
decide where
membership.
money goes, all
And
of
all
this
the
kind
campaigns across the country?
of activating the membership, that sort of thing, politically activating the membership. Yeah. And but I did lobby. I helped whenever there was a little problem here or there. They needed some help. Who'd they call on? The guy with the money. I helped with ERISA. I helped with OSHA. I became somewhat important in two ways. A guy by the name of Phil Bird. You ever know that name?
Sounds familiar.
Phil and I were good buddies even before I came to Washington. Congressman from San Francisco. Phil and I, dinner next door. When he wanted to escape, he'd come over to my apartment. And Phil was a big drinker in them days, and so was I. Anyway, Phil Burton and Norm Mineta. Norm Mineta was chair of the Transportation Committee, and Norm Mineta and I went to high school together.
No wonder you were such a valuable
So I had the in there,
lobbyist.
yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of Phil Burton, Phil helped me on so many things, legislative stuff. Because he was like the second on the what was the name of the committee? The one that Udall was the head of. Commerce, I don't know. Anyway, and Phil could get things done. He was the kind of guy who could cut deals with the Republicans. You give me this, I'll give you that kind of stuff. Phil died, and then his wife, Sala, became the congresswoman. And I'm kind of, have to look it up the years. Then Sala contracted cancer, and Sala asked, I'm very close to Sala too, asked me, she says, there's a person by the name of Nancy Pelosi that's going to run for this seat. I want you to support her. In that election, there were 8 Democrats. It was after Sala died. There were 8 Democrats in the primary. Primary was an election in San Francisco,
Right,
as
of
you know.
course, yeah.
The San Francisco Central Labor Council endorsed some guy, I forget who the hell it was even. We endorsed Nancy Pelosi. We set up a phone bank in our Air Transport Lodge office in San Mateo. Got the list of all the registered Democrats, started phoning like crazy. Nancy Pelosi won, and Nancy and I have been friends ever since. Yeah. Little stories like that.
Helping people when
Yeah.
early money,
Yeah.
early help is important. So 72 is the, do you remember that election?
Yeah, that's the year that after the executive council meeting of the AFL-CIO met in Florida.
And you went to that as political director?
Pardon me?
You went as political
yes,
director?
absolutely. We had even separate meetings there, and that was. I'm trying to remember that it was after the nomination of McGovern, which would have been what, in July or something or other in
Right, mid-summer.
68. No. Dates. Anyhow, it was after that the council decided not to endorse McGovern, and that's when Red Smith said, try to put together a labor committee for McGovern, which we did. Basically,
Did you start while you were still in Miami?
I started talking while still in,
Yeah.
where were we? Not Fort Lauderdale, but Bell Harbor.
Right.
Bell Harbor.
Yep.
That's where I first met your father, as a matter
Yeah,
of
he
fact.
went every year.
Yeah.
Every time.
Where I first met him. And so I contacted normal allies, CWA and Graphic Arts Union and
AFSCME.
AFSCME. There were 9 or 10 unions, but there were two outside, one outsider, UAW. I got UAW to come in. We
Art
made
workers.
steel workers, absolutely. And why the hell can't memory? The president of the CWA at the time was, I can see him, but I can't tell you his name. I want to say Webb, but it's not Webb.
Huh.
Anyway, we made him the chair of the labor committee for McGovern. And it was mostly machinist money that started it, naturally, our political funds. And, of course, we knew we weren't going to win, but we still were the labor. And incidentally, out of that, I became very close friends with George McGovern.
Really?
Yeah. I introduced George McGovern to a restaurant in Washington, D.C., across from her office, and he and his wife would go there quite often. George would take my wife and I to the Kennedy Center for concerts. That's where my wife got to meet Leonard Bernstein, because George McGovern and Leonard Bernstein were good friends.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Huh.
And my wife got to meet Leonard Bernstein through George McGovern. Matter of fact,
So,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, was there a moment during that campaign when you thought he might win?
Pardon me?
Was there a period when you thought there was a chance of success?
With McGovern?
Mhm.
Never. Never. It was preordained that he was not going to win. You could tell that by getting the information from your people in the field, asking them the questions about, how's things going. Everything was.
But people still worked as hard as they
The
could?
good, solid Democrats did, yeah. You never give up. As a matter of fact, that was a time when no, that was 68 when I got mad at Don Edwards. You remember that guy?
Uh-huh.
Don and I were good friends. But Don and I deserted Hubert Humphrey during the election. Didn't go for Nixon, but didn't do anything to help Hubert Humphrey. And I got mad at Don over that. Yeah. So, 72, yeah, we worked for the McGovern stuff, but knew it wasn't going to work. Anyway, where do we go from there?
You mentioned that you were connected and played a role in OSHA.
Yes,
Tell me about that.
ERISA.
And ERISA.
Well, he needed some, you list out every member of Congress that you were going to try to get a vote from, and they asked me to contact certain people that I,
Who asked you?
the guy in the legislative department. As a matter of fact,
This is before they're together.
yeah,
Before
oh
they're
yes,
together.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. This was 72, 73. OSHA was signed in 74, I think. After that I said, Nixon is not a pro-labor guy, but he's done some good stuff for us. He really has.
Yeah, he's got
Yeah.
a very mixed. You can't hate everything he did. You can hate him, but you can't hate everything he did.
That's absolutely right, and I've said that many times.
Yeah.
That he gave us some pretty good stuff. Yeah.
So would you bring members to go visit there?
Oh yes, yeah, in key places where members were close to a particular member of Congress. I can't remember specifics, but yeah.
So did you keep lists?
Pardon me?
Did you keep this all in your head?
I kept a lot of stuff on paper until the National Right to Work Committee got the right to look at all of our records. And then I started not writing stuff down. That was in...
When was that?
I think 76, 77, in that era. They got the right to go through all of our files. Out of that, a book was written, The $100 Million Payoff, by one of the Watergate guys. The one who said, yeah, I'll even burn my hand, or stuff like that, the crazy guy.
Woodward.
No.
Woodward and Bernstein.
The crazy guy for Nixon. One of the guys who was caught in the Watergate. Anyway, the name of the book is The $100 Million Payoff.
Got it. Okay.
Out of that, them getting to look at all of our records and papers and stuff, court order, he was able to get that information and write a lot of crap in there about the unions and their involvement in politics. I think that was somewhere in the late 70s, as I recall.
Yeah.
And we, incidentally, we tried through the courts to get the right to, by court order, to get the right to look at the National Right to Work Committee's files. Never would give it to us. Shows you how the courts are.
Not pro-working people. So you stopped keeping things on paper. But,
Yeah. And a lot of it was over an election, the Senate election in Arkansas too. That's when, what the hell were we opposing? Somebody, I think it was with David Pryor, the father of the present Pryor, who was a moderate conservative Democrat, but we still wanted a Democrat. Yeah. As a matter of fact, we had a guy stand up, I should have said something, at the meeting yesterday about, we got into, with the present director, made a speech about, well, I support a Republican or a Democrat, depends on how they vote. Well, the most important vote, naturally, is the first one they make for the organization of the body. I'll hold my nose and support a rotten Democrat if a vote for the majority leader or the speaker over the Republic.
Right.
Because that's the most important vote, as you can see today with the House. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So anyway, where are we?
So you're political director, and you're telling me about some of the key battles or efforts that you helped with. Did you continue to travel all the time?
Oh yes.
Always.
As a matter of fact, I probably was out of Washington, D.C. 50% of the time. I used to add the mileage up 200,000 miles in the year every year.
That's a lot.
I still have some original United Airlines miles. Before they put you lose them after a while.
Right.
I think I got a couple 100,000 original United miles. They keep saying they're going to take them away. Anyway, I traveled an awful lot, but I would always come back to Washington, D.C. naturally, because I had work in Washington, D.C. all the time. And I would come back when they absolutely needed me on something, because I had a couple of pretty good political people. A person by the name of Dorothy Ellsworth, who was well connected in Congress. Dorothy Ellsworth Gannon. Now she married Jack Gannon, who was the president of the firefighters union at the time.
That's right. I know that name. Okay.
And Marjorie. God dang it! Why can't I think of Marjorie's last name? My socialist Marjorie worked both politics and legislation, and then Maria Cordoni, I hired her. I didn't hire her. Wimp asked me, when Wimp was retiring, he came down to my office. He didn't call me up to his office. He came down to my office, and he said, Bill, he says, I want you to consider putting Maria on your staff. Yeah, this is the president asking me. I said, sure. He said, but I want you to know, if she doesn't work out, if you don't think she's doing a good job, you let Corpus was going to be the president. You let Corpus know, and we'll put her someplace else. I says, well, under them conditions, what could I say? You know? So that's Maria came in. Maria became really good on the Hill. For some reason or another, her and Dorothy both, I don't know whether it was the female thing or what, but they were both very good with members of Congress. And of course, Dorothy kind of took her under her wing too, and showed her around, where the tunnels are and all this kind of stuff. They did very good work for me. And incidentally, Dorothy's still alive, and she's still doing some legislative work in Colorado for the Alliance for Retired Americans.
No kidding.
Yeah, she's been retired for a while. So, but I had very good connections, personal connections. Jim Oberstar, especially committee chairs. And Phil Burton became the chair of the Labor Education Committee. Mo Udall.
Who you knew from?
Udall from Arizona.
And how did you know him?
Oh, you get to know him because of being the political director of the Machinists Union. I was on Mo Udall's fundraising committee, even though I'm a machinist. Matter of fact, one of the stories is do you ever hear about the coal slurry pipeline vote?
The which pipeline?
Coal slurry pipeline.
Oh, yes, yes.
The coal companies wanted to build a pipeline from Wyoming coal fields down to Louisiana, to the power plants down there. And they wanted to build this pipeline, and they called it coal slurry because the coal was mashed up into little, like dust almost, and shot through this pipeline with water. Well, it was environmentally crazy to begin with, but secondly, it would put a lot of our railroad people out of work. So, but the Building and Construction Trades Department wanted the coal slurry pipeline.
Because it's building
they would
and
build
construction jobs.
But, we used to tell them, I said, yeah, this is a one-shot deal for you guys. This is a
lifetime job.
Lifetime job for our guys. Anyway, it was in trouble. They were going to lose. Mo Udall was the chair of the committee that voted it out. Phil Burton was second ranking on that committee, so I had an in on the committee through Phil. And of course, Mo and I were good friends. I'm on his fundraising committee, mind you. And Mo knew I was working the other side. He was for the coal slurry pipeline, incidentally.
Huh.
And part of his reasoning was, even though he was a great environmentalist, we have a small one in Arizona, and I guess they did. And he says, we have no problem with it. I say, yeah, but this one's going from Wyoming to Louisiana.
Yeah.
You know, you break in the line, it's like the oil line breaks.
Yeah.
So anyway, the vote was in trouble. We had a coalition of railroad companies and unions that were involved with railroad labor. Machinists, was BRAC at the time, Brotherhood of Railway and Airline Clerks,
Right.
which is now TCU and a part of the machinists, and locomotive engineers, you know, all the railroad unions. And they'd meet every Tuesday at a little hotel, conference room, off of DuPont Circle in Washington, and go over their strategy and what congressmen weigh out, count the numbers. They were in trouble. So they asked me to come to a meeting one day, one of their regular meetings, and I went. And they asked me to become chairman of the coalition. I said, geez, you know, I got a whole lot of other things I got to do. But I said, important, okay, I'll become chair. So we had about 25, 26 people that would attend these meetings. And over the course of our working on it, I discovered that we had a leak someplace. So I had a meeting and a meeting. I didn't know who the leak was, but I knew who the solid people were, for sure. I couldn't pinpoint who was given the other side information from our meetings. So I developed a small group, a couple of the lobbyists from the railroad industry, and a couple of people union people that I knew I could trust, absolutely. And we went to work, and out of our meetings, we would have meetings with the Republicans and Democrats in the House. And I remember there was a Republican who was the head of this kind of coalition from Nebraska. I can't remember his name, but he was like the chair of the Republicans and Democrats that were against the Coal Slurry Pipeline. And we would meet with them and let them know where we thought we were vote-wise. And of course, on the day of the vote, we met with them in the morning, and I went over the votes with them. I said, I'm not going to tell you person by person by person, but I'll tell you how many votes we have. I came within 2 votes of defeating the coal. We defeated the Coal Slurry Pipeline, but I came within 2 votes of the number that we had. That night, it just so happened we had a dinner of the fundraising committee of Mo Udall's fundraising committee, and it was in a little downstairs of a restaurant in Georgetown. And after the meeting was over, not a word was said by Mo to me about it until the meeting was over and everybody was getting up and leaving. And Mo says to me, he says, Bill, he says, you know, I wanted that Coal Slurry Pipeline to pass. And he says, you know, his words, he says, you rolled me today. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you beat me today. You rolled me. He says, you'll never have to worry about it as long as I'm chair of that committee again. I said, well, why not? He says, because I'll never bring that up again. That was the end of the Coal Slurry Pipeline.
Really?
Yeah, it never did come up again. Fun days at times.
Yeah, it's impressive, huh?
Whenever something on the Transportation Committee, which we were very involved in because we're very involved in the transportation industry, Norman Ed and I were high school, we're high school children. We graduated the same year in 1950. So Norman and I were good friends. I kind of lost track of him too after he left the secretary. He became Secretary of Transportation, if you'll recall, under Clinton. And then he resigned. I talked to him shortly before he resigned. He says he just couldn't take it anymore. Tremendous back pain all the time.
Mm.
Yeah. So he resigned. Then I lost track of him. Yeah. Of course, I was out in Washington State by that time anyway. Yeah.
So while you were still in Washington, D.C., were there other environmental issues where
Oh
you
yeah, all the
were
normal stuff. Yeah.
torn between?
I was never torn. Clean air. Our union was never torn like some of the other unions were. And incidentally, the steel workers who had a big stake in this were just as, for the lack of a better word, liberal on the Clean Air Act and all of this stuff, because they realized their members were breathing that same crap
Right.
as everybody else was. So if you could clean up the atmosphere, it was better for everybody. Now the steel workers were with us on all of that environmental stuff, but some of the other unions weren't.
Yeah.
But mostly they wouldn't come out. I mean, it was like they were a little embarrassed, but they wouldn't come out and fight hard to not do it, the clean air, clean water kind of stuff. But we were always in the forefront. Our union, to its credit, was always in the forefront of that stuff. And I think a lot of it was, even though Red Smith was a conservative when I first became the political director, even though Red was a conservative, he still kind of went along with our liberal leanings. And then, of course, when Wimp became president, the first thing, Wimp became president on January 1 of 1989, whatever the year it was. And he took over. He had a staff meeting at midnight, starting January 1. And he had a staff meeting, and he laid out to the staff, the old rah-rah, work. And after the meeting, I said to Wimp, I said, I know it's normal, do you want a letter of resignation? And he says, no. He says, Bill, he says, the only thing I want from you is that whenever you're in doubt about anything, go to the left. His exact quote. Whenever you're in doubt of anything, go to the left. I said, that's pretty easy.
Did you work closely with him before he became president?
Oh, yeah. Look, Wimp was the president before he became president.
Okay.
I don't, you could read between the lines.
Yeah.
Wimp really ran the union. Red was a decent guy, but Wimp ran the union. Well, he was the resident vice president at the time too, so that gave him the chair to do it, really. Good guy to work for. Easy guy to work for. He says later, other times he says, Bill, if you ever make a mistake, he says, don't worry about it, I'll back you up on it. But he says, if you do it honestly rather than, stupidly, he says, I'll back you up. And he told me, don't never make a commitment you can't keep. So we, our philosophy became that if you make a commitment, you got to live up to it, no matter what. A lot of that became evident in the Draft Kennedy movement. I was the one who did the Draft Kennedy stuff.
Really?
The footwork on that, under the instructions of William W. Whitmansinger. I got other unions involved in it. They'd make a commitment, money, people, whatever. Couldn't live up to it. We made a commitment, we lived up to it, no matter what. We're known for that. And Wimp was a great guy to work for. Absolutely a great guy. And of course, George was good to work for, because George and I were very, very personal friends. Right from, you see now, George and I hang around together all the time.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about civil rights in the machinists.
It was difficult in some places. I remember the Jesse Jackson. Wimp nominated Jesse Jackson at the what the heck was that, the 88 convention or whatever convention
okay.
it was. Oh, I'd be out in the field in Kentucky and several places. What's the matter with our international president? He's going crazy, you know, supporting this nigger. I said, well, you know, he believes in it. And if you ever listen to him, you'd know why. And Wimp was very good at convincing people of his position on things. They may not have agreed with him, even after he was done, but they admired him for that position he had. A lot of it I'll never forget over our position on the defense spending and the building of all this, you know, weapons of war and stuff, and we'd get into arguments with people at it was District 837, the McDonnell Douglas. Mm-hmm. That was one of the worst places we had because they were building nothing but fighter planes. And that's when we put legislation in the converting from defense to domestic, and in the process we tried to get some money for training and stuff like that, but it never really worked out. But Wimp would necessarily not convince him, but would you know, really articulate the reason why. Like I think me and Corp were talking about, and Maria, were you in there when we would open the program and you'd have the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag and then the singing of the national anthem?
Of Canada, and yes.
Shit, nothing but warplanes and warships. What the hell's going on here, for Christ's sake?
Yeah. Slideshow.
So I
As
said,
a matter of
what
fact.
the shit? We're a war yet?
Is it, they just use an old slideshow, or?
They still think a lot of our members, I guess, are involved in the defense work. And some of them are, but not as much.
It's gotta be.
Not as much as used to.
Yeah.
And you know, under Wimp, we even did studies. I can't remember the name of the woman, a woman from the University of Michigan, and somebody else did research on how if you take $1 and you spend it on defense versus $1 that you spend domestically, you'll get 2 jobs domestic, 1 job defense. You know, we had all that information documented. Excuse me, that our union paid for that research to do that, to show it. Part of it was to show our members how crazy it was for us to be spending this money on stuff we hope we never have to use.
Right,
You know.
yeah.
But anyway, Wimp was great to work for. And of course, George for me, was even better because George and I were so close. You know.
Was the research department separate from your department?
Research
or?
department separate, yes.
But you must have worked closely together.
Oh, we're closely together with all the departments. I don't know if you know the name Bob Kolaski.
Yes.
Bob and I were great friends. He was the head of our communications, publication department. He died a while back. Big loss to us retirees we have a little group within the retirees group that really started the retirees department with Maria.
Okay. So let's go back. You retired in?
My official retirement date was May 1 of 1992.
92.
I actually quit work the day after my retirement party, which I think was January 31 or something like that. I had enough vacation bill. I was the only one person at headquarters that they would let accumulate vacation. Everybody else could not accumulate more than 1 year vacation. It was part of the rules and regulations. But because I was always out in the field, when I was back here, I was working. I don't want to sound modest, but it was like I was too valuable not to take vacation. You know? So I had enough vacation built up to go from the end of January to my retirement date on May 1. I went to work for Tom Harkin.
Oh, no kidding.
For his presidential campaign. And the day I went in there, everybody in there was, oh, we're so glad to see you, because I started raising money right away for Tom. And, I became the inner circle in town, I remember the day we met at his house out in Alexandria, and him and his wife. And there were about 4 or 5 other people there. And whether the election would go on or not, the campaign would go on or not. And it was at a point where they would have to mortgage the house for money. And I was really upset about that because, I'll tell you in a minute, but they decided they just couldn't do that. They couldn't jeopardize the house there in Alexander for the kids and everything. So the election was out. But at the same time, and I think it was a violation of campaign laws, Clinton was able to borrow money from banks in Arkansas to continue his campaign. And nothing ever came of that.
Yeah.
But at that time, I said, that's got to be a violation of the Campaign Finance Act for him to be able to borrow money from financial institutions what do you call it when you don't have anything to put up for the money?
Right, no collateral.
Yeah, yeah. And that's how he was able to continue in the primary and caucuses. Yeah.
Did you come around to be a Clinton supporter?
Never was a Clinton supporter. Was not against him. I knew Bill Clinton. I first met him in Jonesboro, Arkansas in 1972 when he ran against Hammerschmidt, who was the congressman in that area, and I was there to give him $5,000 for the campaign. And at that time he was a womanizer then, and I believe only his age stops him from being a womanizer. Yeah.
Is that part of the reason you're distant from him?
No, it was more his he's not a liberal Democrat.
He really isn't.
He's not a liberal Democrat. No, he when he was governor in the 80s. Oh, come to Arkansas, right to work state. You don't have to worry about the unions. We got the great environment here. Kind of like what Perry's doing in Texas and has done in Texas. So, he was no friend of organized labor. And, he got close to Wall Street, close to the big money guys. That's why this guy, Terry McAuliffe, who just won in Virginia, he should have won, if it was a good Democrat, would have won by a whole lot of numbers.
Yeah.
That's the wheeler dealer, Wall Street types, money types.
So you retire and you jump on the Harkins campaign, and then after that, obviously you have an idol and you're retired.
I was very close to Al Gore because we supported him. As a matter of fact, just to regress one time, and there's only one person alive that can attest to this story, and it's my wife. We were at a recital of George McGovern. He had taken piano lessons, and he had an apartment on Connecticut Avenue, past DuPont Circle, Upper Connecticut Avenue, but before you got into the area where the Shoreham Hotel and all that is. It's where that curve in it, Yeah. He had an apartment on the top floor, and he invited me and my wife to his recital, and there was Albert Gore Sr., who I was fairly close to, and Art Buchwald. So
my personal hero.
Yeah,
I've always loved him.
Great guy. Anyhow, we're standing there talking. Al Gore Sr., Art Buchwald, and myself, and my wife. Of course, she was just listening. And I said to Al Gore Sr., I said, your son's going to be president someday. He's got the class to be president someday. And I said that to Buchwald and Al Gore Sr., and of course my wife can attest to it because she's still alive. The other two are dead. And son of a bitch, he did become president.
Yeah.
Only the Supreme Court took it away from him. But, yeah. And after that, I was very instrumental in setting up phone banks around the country in our union halls.
For the Gore.
No, just in general.
In general,
Just
for
in
all
general.
different kinds of campaigns, right?
As a matter of fact, I contracted with a company to buy 500 phones. They were all reconditioned phones. So I contracted with this company to buy the 500 phones. And I tell anybody out there in key places, you get a room, put the lines in, I'll give you the phones. One of them was District 751. I talked to them when they were building their new building in Seattle, actually in South Seattle, to set up a room just for phone banks. I'll give you all the phones. And they did, and then what year was it? 2000? 2000, when it was Gore Bush?
Mm-hmm.
I lived about 60 miles away from the district because I lived on this island then. But I would come in and take a shift of the phone banks, the phone bank that I encouraged them to set up. And it had just so happened that one day, I'm sitting there. This was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and we're making phone calls to union people that we knew were, either retired or on the swing shift or whatever. And in walks Al Gore and John Sweeney.
Oh, no kidding.
I'm not kidding at all. And I'm right at the door because I've got that phone right here and all the figures and all the papers. And Al Gore looks at me. He says, "Bill, what the hell are you doing here?" I says, "I'm working for you." And of course, John Sweeney says hello to me. But I was still working. Yeah. But then after that, when we moved to Montana, as a matter of fact, I was very active with the Alliance for Retired Americans. I was their Northwest regional director. I was, you'll see in there, I was on I was the chair of the bylaws committee for the Alliance, helped set up Alliance state organizations in different places. And Charlie Williams is really the one who did a lot of good work on that. But when I moved to Montana, I said, I'm away from everything. I'm up in the mountains. It's hard for me to get out and do things because I'm really doing something else now. We're building the lodge. And George kept saying, Bill, George Corpus, who was president of the Alliance at the time, every once in a while they'd ask me to go someplace to do something, but I wasn't doing anything on my own initiative anymore. And I kept telling George, and geez, good friend who's just retired as Alliance executive director. Anyway, they kept saying, no, stay. And George kept saying, stay until I give up the position. So I did at the same time that Barbara Easterly was elected the president of the Alliance. Then I resigned. But up until that time, I was still active. Now I don't do much now.
Can you tell me about earlier in your retirement, you helped set up the machinist retarees programs?
You helped do that.
Can you tell me about that?
Plus
tell me about the earliest.
Okay. What we did was Maria gathered several people around her, and I didn't want to do anything at first. Honest to God, the first year after I retired, I was not well. Matter of fact, that was one of the reasons I retired. I'd had 2 cancer operations. I've had 5 bouts of cancer, and I'm still suffering from one, an incurable one.
Sorry, but you look great.
But it's not a death-defying one right away. It's a blood cancer. Very, very rare blood cancer disease called Waldenstrom. I'll tell you about that later if you want.
Okay.
I sat down with George and I kept telling George, I'm not no good anymore. I just, I don't have it in me. And besides that, I was getting mad at people. I told Dick Gebhardt I'd never talk to him again because he lied to us about something. And, stuff like that. I was not feeling well. I was getting mean and bitter. And I just said, I'm not doing you any good anymore. I gotta move on, get out of here. So about the first year, we built a place on the tip of the island. Steve Petroulis, you know Steve? He was a UAW guy, but he's now the head of the elderly housing.
Oh, okay.
I was very close to Steve. Steve at the time was the executive director of the National Council of Senior Citizens. Anyhow, Steve comes out. And we're sitting on the I'll never forget this. We're sitting on the balcony on the deck, and on the deck you could, if that little point weren't there, you could see the Capitol at Olympia. Out this way was Mount Rainier. If you could see it,
Right.
If it wasn't.
And all those clear days.
Yeah.
Yes. I understand.
Beautiful, it actually in the
Sounds
woods
gorgeous.
of cedar and madrona. If you ever come to my place, you'll see a piece of stained glass artwork of Mount Rainier and a madrona tree that grew out, twisted madrona limb that grew outside our window. That a priest who grew up with my wife became an expert at stained glass, taught it at Carroll College in Helena. But anyway, he did this for us in other pieces. But we're sitting on the deck there, and of course we're drinking. And he says to me, he says, let's call George. So we call George Corpus. And he says, George, why don't you run for president of the National Council? George said, geez. George was just retired, just recently retired. And he talked George into running for president. And as a result of that, he says, now you got to go to work for the National Council. So he talked me into doing work. So I went to work for the National Council, became the Northwest Regional Director, and then out of that into the Alliance, the same thing. And then when we went to Montana, very shortly after that is when I said, I'm resigning because George didn't run again.
But go back to when Maria calls you up.
Okay. You see, Maria actually got together about 8 people. I knew every one of them. I think only 1 or 2 are alive yet. When the department was really retirees and community services, but nothing was ever done with the retirees part of it. So she got these 8 guys together. She wanted me to come. I said, Maria, I can't come. I don't feel good. I don't. Leave me alone. Anyway, they sat down and discussed, how you go about really getting this thing going. Then one of the problems in the machinist union and other unions is after a person retires, it's, don't let the door hit you in the ass. Get out of here. Leave us alone. So one of the barriers we had was convincing our own leadership that
It was worth
an
effort.
So now I was not a part of that first year. But Maria, after that, would kept saying, Bill, can you help? Can you help? Can you help? And then that's when I got involved with the National Council, and then I started helping machinists. And what we would actually do, to a great extent, is we would pick places where there was a possibility for developing a retirees chapter of a union. And in a lot of places there already was one, but it was, work and kind of this and that. It was a social organization, and we were preaching not only, getting together with the machinist member and their spouse, mm-hmm. and having a social program, but getting involved in politics because it meant so much. Of course, we went through the whole, spiel of the Social Security, Medicare, and they're trying to take it away from you all the time. The old spiel. And so we were trying to not only develop retiree chapters within the existing machinist structure, but to increase the activity of the ones that existed. And so we would pick our places and go. And Maria then asked me to travel with her around the country because I was the one who had all the legislative information and political information, and I was known as a great speaker and all this kind of stuff, and I could encourage people to do things,
inspire
whatever. And so she got me very involved, and I did that for a number of years with her, and we traveled with different people, and we got George to travel with us at times. And
traveling, you would go to different retirees.
Yeah, and then during election
conferences.
periods when we were not just trying to develop chapters or increase their activities, but we were doing political work as well, campaign work, if you will, for whoever was running for president or particular Senate race.
So you would go to key
absolutely
districts.
Yeah. Ohio was one of them, some in California. Different places that were, as a matter of fact, Maria would ask me to where the key elections were, because I was still pretty knowledgeable at that time. Now I'm not so knowledgeable because I don't study it anymore like I did before. But that's how that grew. And actually, you got to credit Maria more than anybody because she kept. I don't know how to put this. There's always a reluctance of the existing leadership to involve retirees. It's like they're afraid of the retirees, or they don't want anything, And we tried to tell them that, look, we could be a great help to you. Formalize an organizing committee within the retirees to help you in organizing drives. Right now, on their own, they're on the picket line. If there's a strike, and right now there are guys that are helping organize, but it's not through the international, it's through a local or a district
relationship. Yeah.
And we'd meet with Tom, and of course Tom and I were good friends up until Tom and I were good friends. And I kept telling him, Tom, you got if you want it to really work, you got to formalize it. You got to make it something that's important to you. Important to the organization for it to really go, and you'll be able to develop more people out of it. These people at this conference here, most of them will go home and not do a goddamn thing because you don't have they come here for the Las Vegas.
You think?
Yeah, when they had the meeting, we started it here in Las Vegas to try to encourage them. We even set up legislative action committees, which I developed a program for them, a written program for them to do legislative stuff. But we never had the money or the formal
support,
commitment or whatever you want to follow through on it. And then it falls apart when they go home because you got Maria and a few of us old retirees doing it on a volunteer basis. And to this day, it's still the same way. And until they formalize it, they'll never really get good use out of the retirees of this organization. And this organization is further along than most.
It is.
I mean, further along than most unions. UAW is very good, but the UAW, the reason the UAW is because so much of the per capita that goes to the international, of the dues of the UAW, goes into their retirement fund. And they have a lot of money to spend on organizing retirees. They have made retirees a formal part of the organization. And then you go the other way. You go to places like the CWA. When I was trying to collect through the National Council and then the Alliance, trying to collect names of retirees so we could get them organized out in the CWA. When a person retires, they're gone. They don't even keep them on a record anyplace. And there's other unions like that.
Yeah.
That once you retire, we don't. You're not on our computer anymore. Yeah. Some of them are getting better though, from what I understand. But out of Maria and Maria's doggedness, or whatever you want to call it, with Buffenbarger. Before that, with Thayer. Bob Thayer was the resident vice president. Good friend, but he was never very good with retirees. You know, it's funny. They're not good with retirees until they become one. Then it's too late.
Yeah.
Then it's too late.
Yeah.
But, you know, she worked through that, and she would always kind of go around him or whatever to Buffenbarger. And Buffenbarger pretty well supported it, but didn't really get into the formalization of it, for lack of a better phrase. So, you know, we were doing it hit and miss kind of stuff. But we did have some, you know, successes. District 751, which I was working with very closely because I lived out that way. They had a retirees club that was almost strictly a social thing. Lunch once a month at their meeting, you know, this kind of thing. They come for the lunch. We got them going politically finally, legislative and politically. Thanks to Mark Blondin, who was now a vice president, good guy, helped put money into the retirees organization. I was able to get $10,000 a year out of him for the Alliance for Retired Americans statewide chapter in Washington. I don't know what they get now, if anything, out of the new one, but Mark was very good with that and helped to get him going politically and legislatively. And so they become a little more, they could become much more powerful, but they could become a little more powerful. But you see, 751's a strange one. Even though they do very, very little defense work, they're very defense inclined. Even though almost all of their work is you know, domestic airline, they're still
the mindset is to support the defense budget,
defense stuff,
because
yeah.
it's our, like,
So, you know, and we've had problems with that because a lot of our members think the Republicans are better on that than the Democrats, you know.
You think that's one of the reasons the political element of retiree activism isn't easy to make happen, because
You
there's
know what I really think?
contradictory-
Person retires, they go in their little den and forget about the rest of the world to a great extent.
Man, in this day and age,
Yeah, a lot of our retirees are like.
most of the political issues on the table are about retirees.
Then you tell me why
health and
62% of
Most.
people 60 and over voted for McCain. Can you tell me why? I think I can tell you why, but can you imagine?
No, I cannot.
No, I'm not 60. 52% votes for
I don't
McCain and 48 for
Yeah.
Obama.
Fear.
It might have been a little better if Obama wasn't black, because we still have racism within our union, within our whole population. But I cannot understand. There is one thing in there, and it's that age-old. The Republicans are good on taxes. Democrats want to tax us to death. They still believe that. And the older they get, the more they believe it. And I think
What about the Republicans wanting to take away your Social Security and your pension?
that's why I think we're able to keep at least 48% of them.
I know we're on the same page, but.
Yeah.
So tell me, I want to hear.
Yeah, and incidentally, something else we did find out
Yeah.
after with Clinton, after the Lewinsky incident, a lot of our old people, they were very much against this Democrat Clinton for doing what he did. So that sex thing came into play with some of the older women.
You know, and it wasn't about sex. It was about integrity.
Yeah.
That's what I think. I mean, I think that.
But working with our retirees is great, and we have retirees that are in great need. I'll never forget a place we went to. Maria asked me to go with her. It was in Bellevue, Illinois, right on the Wisconsin border, a local lodge there. I think the plant shut down or something. And here was this whole bunch of retirees that were losing their health benefits. They had it in the contract, but when the place goes down, goes bankrupt, and
Right.
or moves out, they lost it. And we went and met with them, and actually they had about 3 times as many retirees there as they generally had at their little retirees meeting, because they were concerned about health care. What could we do? We said, well, I don't know what the heck we could do, but we could sure look into to trying to find some place where we could get some kind of insurance for you, because Maria not only had the retirees, but community services
Right.
department. I don't know whatever came of it. Well, it's places like that she would ask me to go with her to help her out, so to
Solve
speak.
problems. Yeah.
And then during the campaign season, a number of us would travel together. Roger Hare, Sam Rodriguez, Charlie Williams. That was the basic. Then we'd pick up somebody else. When Frank Ortis, who is now the mayor of Pembroke Pines in Florida,
I heard that.
Don Morrow, who's
And you would travel, you mean like in the 2008 campaign, you would go to Ohio
yeah.
and stay there for a week
Yeah,
or two?
2000, 2004. No, we travel the state. We'd actually get them to set up meetings with the retirees. We would be here.
So you would be there energizing the local.
And George would travel
manpower.
with us sometimes. But the core was Roger Hare, Charlie Williams, myself, Maria, and that was the ones who went all the time.
Uh-huh.
Then we'd
So are you
pick up
guys called the
Sam.
Rat Pack?
Yeah.
And what is that name from?
I think Maria just got it from the Rat Pack here. I don't know. We became a Rat Pack. we let her.
Has anybody
We let
got a
her do
great
it.
voice?
Huh?
Anybody got a great voice?
No.
Nope.
But I did meet Frank Sinatra.
Yes.
That's another little offshoot of the '68 campaign. Frank Sinatra was very active in the Humphrey campaign. He had a house in Palm Springs at the time.
Yes.
He invited everybody that could come, and this was like a month before the election. Everybody that could come, that was one of the campaign leaders for the Humphrey for President campaign, to his house in Palm Springs.
No kidding.
So I got to go down there and meet him. Yeah. Yeah, he was, and then he became a Republican.
Yes. Huh. I want you to tell me what you think your vision of a structure for a retired machinists organization would look like.
Well, I'm not sure, but to go back to it, I think you have to have some kind of a formalized, not a constitution, but some kind of what would you call it? What the thing is supposed to do?
A mission statement.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, mission. What's the mission of this organization? And not just limp it, but again, formalize it. Make it a part of the organization. You got a department, but it's not really a part of the organization. It's a hit or miss affair. Fund it better than you're funding it now. We had advocated, but never could get it into our Grand Lodge convention to take some of the per capita tax of the international. The international gets so much per capita tax from the dues.
Right.
But remember, and set it aside for a retirees program, so that the retirees program has some money to operate on. Some, if you want to, hire more people to do the job than one person and a secretary who has responsibility for retirees, community services, and on and on.
Yeah, huge.
And have a staff like you would in the political legislative department or any other department. Fund it. Fund volunteers, even though I can go here and there. It does cost money, and Some of them don't even have as much money as I have, some of our retirees that are good. But if you ask them to do something, you ought to at least pay their expenses, kind of thing. We don't have money for that.
Yeah.
Or we don't have a great deal. Now, my expenses were pretty much paid all along the way, although I did do some stuff without being paid. But, you know, if I had to travel to Ohio or someplace like that, Maria would pick up, that department would pick up. But that money didn't come out of the Machinists Union. We have a dues checkoff that goes to the retirees department. I think I check off $5 a month that goes to the retirees department.
So that money came from retirees?
That comes from out of my
dues.
retirement pay. Yeah, it doesn't come out of dues.
Right.
It's a voluntary contribution to the retirees department.
Got it. Yes.
And there are a number of us that do that. Those that have a pension from the International is basically because it's easy to do the checkoff with the International of our retirement pay. Just like MNPL, the political thing.
Now, were you involved in setting that up?
The MNPL?
Mm-hmm.
No, that was set up, I don't know, something like 20 years before I became the director.
Were you involved in making it bigger?
Oh, yes. More active in the field. Bigger fundraising, which has increased almost all the time with a little setback here and there. But and the checkoff has helped a lot to raise money. You know, it's a painless way of raising money.
Yeah.
A guy I don't know if you know the name Gordon Cole, was our director of our communications, the newspaper.
Oh yeah, I have heard.
Before Bob Kolaski.
Mm-hmm.
Gordon Cole came down to my office one day, I don't know, it has to be 30 years ago, whenever the $1,000 club started. And Gordon Cole says, Bill, he says, I'm going to give $1,000 to the MNPL PAC. Oh, great, because that time you got whatever you could get. And out of that came the $1,000 club. I didn't become an original member. I did it the second year.
Okay.
And I'm the director. You know, Corpus, Frank Souza, naturally Gordon Cole. There were like 8 that were original $1,000 members. And out of that growing, we've got, I don't know how many $1,000 members. And it's not just $1,000, like Corp gives $2,000. And I said to Corp, I said, you know, I'm still giving $1,000. And he says, I wish I could give more. And Corp says, yeah, but my retirement's better than yours. So I give 2. Anyhow, out of that, Gordon Cole's 1,000 came we have a good cadre of $1,000 contributors now. But also the checkoff has been very helpful. And there were places where I actually had to go and sit down with the company who refused to give them checkoff.
For the
political contribution. And I know the biggest one was Republic in Connecticut.
Huh.
General Dynamics?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, they're awful anti-union, you know. They had to check off for their own for their own management people. And of course the law says that they got to give the union the same thing as they do for management. I probably sat down with them 3 times, and I finally said, I'm not going to take you to court unless you give us the checkoff there. I had to do almost the same thing with Boeing in Seattle, which now has a great checkoff going. Boeing didn't want to give them the check. Oh, it's too much. Our computer program is not set up to do it. You got to tell them, I don't care whether it is or not. You got to give it to them. It's the law. And I had to sit down with these companies, but you could only do it where they were doing it.
Right.
If a company was not checking,
then had to do it.
And of course, it was easy for us to learn who was doing it because of the reporting to the Federal Election Commission,
Right.
and we studied those records of the companies that we had, you know. But General Dynamics was the worst. I mean, Yeah, Republic General Dynamics in Hartford, Connecticut, East Hartford. I remember sitting down with them. They were awful. But to check off,
You were persuasive.
now remember, I've been retired for 21 years, so little by little by little by little by little. Now we used to, for instance, we'd raise about $1.2 million, maybe $1.3 million a year for the PAC. I think they're up at like $2.5 million now.
Really?
Yeah. So just little by little increasing. Yeah. But we're small now compared to where the other PACs, a lot of the other PACs are. Where when we first got started, actually we were number 4 one year, 76 or whenever it was, among all the PACs in PAC money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the landscape has changed.
Yeah.
So.
I think there's only 2 unions now, NEA and AFSCME or service employees that are among the top 10. Yeah, all the other ones are, corporations.
Yeah. Oh dear.
Okay.
So I think we need to wrap up, although I'm sure there's many stories that we haven't captured.
Oh, I've got a lot of stories.
We'll,
You'll get some of them in the book if you want to take the time to read the book.
I absolutely am. I'm so glad you brought that. And is there one more thing you need to say?
No,
Need to tell me? I thank you so much.